All right, welcome back to ABA exam review and our RBT exam practice question series, where we're going through the next set of questions together and breaking them down. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. Please like and subscribe. Be sure to check out btexamreview.com for all of our study materials, including our combo pack. As always, when you pass, please let us know so we can include you in the Sunday shout out. Work hard, study hard. Let's get going. A team meeting is held to discuss the last month of behavior for a client that you share with two other technicians. A supervisor asks each of you to describe the function of the behavior. Which of the following choices would be best to respond with? All right, so we're thinking in terms of having a meeting with our supervisor and trying to explain the function of the behavior. And that's the key to this question. The supervisor is asking specifically about the function. Remember, when we talk about behavior, we can talk about topography or how it looks. We can talk about magnitude or the intensity, or we can talk about function and the reason it occurs. So if the supervisor is asking you to describe the function of the behavior, they want one of four things. Is it attention based? Is it tangible based? Is it escape or avoidance based? Or is it automatic or sensory based? Why is it happening? So let's find the choice where we're going to describe why the behavior is occurring. A, the client repeatedly grabs Play-Doh or putty and opens and closes their fist when they are bored. Now, the first part of the answer is describing what? Topography. It's how the behavior looks. Nothing wrong with that. However, the reason given is the client is bored. Bored is not a function. Bored is a hypothetical construct. It is not a function. So, A is not describing the function. B, the client will grab Play-Doh or putty and squeeze very hard throughout the day for sensory reasons. Okay, well, we also described somewhat of the topography, what it looks like, grabbing Play-Doh and squeezing hard, but then we got to the function part. It is happening for sensory reasons. Now, the technical term for this function is automatic, basically alone, by yourself, no second party. But now a lot of people use sensory interchangeably. So automatic and sensory are essentially considered the same thing these days. Either way, B is describing an actual function. C, the client will grab Play-Doh or something similar throughout the day for control. Now be careful here, all right? Control is not a function. You might have heard before, well, control is considered maybe the unofficial fifth function. Maybe here or there. It's not an official function. We're not going to describe behavior saying it's for control. We need to use one of the four functions. And then D, the client will grab putty or Play-Doh and engage with it for hours at a time. Again, we're talking measurement here, right? Here's our duration. They engage with it for hours at a time. We've got somewhat of the topography, right? They're going to grab putty or Play-Doh. That's all fine and dandy, except the supervisor needs to know the function. So when the supervisor asks about the function, well, B is the only answer or response that answered the question. The client will grab the Play-Doh and putty throughout the day for sensory reasons. The function is sensory. A technician wakes up late and does not have time to eat breakfast before she needs to leave to go to her client's house. Once she arrives at the house, the client's family starts eating breakfast and offers her a plate. How should the technician respond? All right, we're talking in terms of the technician and her response to being offered a plate of food. We know the technician woke up late. We know the technician did not eat breakfast. And then when she got to the house, the client's family started to eat breakfast. Always an uncomfortable, difficult situation. I've been in situations when I was a technician where families are eating lunch or they buy me food, things like that. Hard and fast rule essentially is we can't accept the food. Okay. Now, there are cultural things to consider where you might have to accept food on occasion because of cultural reasons or because of background reasons or relationship reasons. In this case, the technician simply didn't eat breakfast. There's no underlying reason for accepting the plate. So, how should she respond? A, accept the food just this one time. She should not accept the food just this one time. Ethically, it is just not allowed. There's no significant reason for her to accept the food and eat a meal while she's on the clock, while she's at work with the family. It just is not ethical given the situation. B, accept the food since she cannot perform her best on an empty stomach. She got up late, right? She couldn't eat breakfast. There's no ethical reason for her to accept this food. Okay, because then all she would be doing is she'd be eating a meal with the family, taking away time from the client. C, accept the food, but do not eat any of it. That's going to be way worse if you accept it and then you don't eat it. You've got a much higher chance of insulting the family, rather than D, politely decline the food and assist decline as necessary. Now, if you politely decline the food and it becomes an issue, that's when you get your supervisor involved. The supervisor can come and explain the reason why, because of conflicts of interest, multiple relationships. It's just not allowed. There's no underlying reason which would make it necessary for the technician or make it acceptable for the technician to take this plate of food. They should politely decline and work, because they're there to help the client. So they need to work with the client as necessary. Shania is using a differential reinforcement of other behaviors intervention, which is targeting a client's running away. If the client does not leave the table for 1 minute, the client receives a token. For the last 2 days, the client will get up from the table at 59 seconds and then laugh. What type of schedule would be best to switch to? This is the problem sometimes with fixed schedules, either fixed ratios or fixed intervals. A lot of clients are able to pick up on what schedule they're on. In this case, this client thinks it's funny because they know the reinforcement comes out 1 minute. So at 59 seconds, what do? Well, they get up from the table and then they laugh. So apparently that's reinforcing for them as well to interrupt this potential schedule to get up on their own schedule. And they know right at 59 seconds, right before the minute, they can get up and they can laugh and potentially get attention for it, is be my guess. Because I've had this happen to me before where clients learn, at 30 seconds, I'm going to get a token for this. And then at 29 seconds, they break the schedule and it's the funniest thing in the world to them. And that's the problem with fixed schedules, fixed ratio schedules as well. If you're relying on a certain number of responses, well, if a client knows they only have to respond 3 times, they might take their time and then 3 rapid responses in a row and they're good to go. So you've got to be smart, or we have to be smart about what type of schedule we're going to use. In this case, the fixed schedule isn't working, right? And why is it fixed? Because every 1 minute, the client is going to receive a token, right? It's not on average, it's not changing, it's fixed, and that's the problem. So we at least need to switch to a variable schedule. So we can eliminate A, fixed interval, and B, fixed ratio. So now we ask ourselves, well, do we want a variable interval or a variable ratio? Well, think about what we're trying to get to happen here, right? We're trying to increase the duration of the client sitting at the table. We're not too worried about the responses, right? It's not really response based because sitting at the table is not a response, right? They're just sitting there. We need that duration to increase. So it does us no good to do a variable ratio 3 because there's no responses to engage in. We want them to sit there for at least a minute. Now, when we choose a variable interval, which we're going to choose because of the time component, it's going to help us because we might make the client sit there for 50 seconds and reward them, or maybe a minute and a half and reward them. We're going to do it on an average, and it's always going to be changing. That way the client can't predict it. If we make the client one time sit there for 50 seconds, well, we've beat them to the punch, right? And they don't get their 59 seconds, okay? So in this case, since the clients learned this fixed schedule, we should switch to the same type of schedule, but on a variable interval, right? So on an average or a changing interval, therefore the client can't predict when reinforcement is coming. Following an assessment, a supervising behavior analyst decides they want to target time on task for a particular client. They are planning on taking duration data to measure time on task. Which of the following would be the best way to record duration data? All right, another measurement question. We're taking duration data. What is duration? It's the length of a single response. So we've got a single response. We're measuring how long it occurs. Remember, behavior is all the responses made up into one. Okay, so if walking is the behavior, a single instance of walking would be the response. And it's pedantic, right? But it's good to know that distinction because when you're measuring a single response. Okay, so we're measuring a response of time on task using duration data. How long can they stay on task for one response? So what is the best way to take duration data? A, tally marks. Well, if you think about tally marks, right, we're going to make a little mark, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What are we doing there? We're counting. We're not taking duration. We're counting with tally marks. Tally marks aren't going to be very effective for time. What about a clicker counter? So one of those tools you hold in your hand, and each time something happens, you Click the button and it counts up. Again, we're not counting how many times something is happening. We're talking about how long, right? We need time. So C, an iPhone stopwatch, is going to be the best way to do this. And you might think this is obvious, and maybe it is to you. And maybe it is an easy question, and that's fine. So a lot of the questions are going to be potentially easy if you're prepared. But it's important when we're measuring to pick the right tool, because if we pick the wrong tool, it's going to mess up the measurement, which makes our data invalid, and we don't want that. And then D, a count kept in your head. You really should never measure anything in your head, even if you're taking frequency and you're just thinking, well, I just have to count. There's still a good chance you get distracted, you miss a count. Always have a tool, always have a measurement tool at your side so you don't miss anything. That's the whole point of continuous measurement, like duration and frequency, is we get to capture every instance of the behavior. So in this case, duration data, the best way to measure that time and record that time is going to be C, an iPhone stopwatch. These two, A and B, have to do with count, and D is just not going to be as accurate. Whenever I am done feeding eggs to my daughter in the morning, I will stand up from the table with the plate. At this point, my dog will walk over to her bowl, and I will put the remaining eggs in her bowl. Standing up from the table represents what relative to the dog walking to her bowl? Now, we're looking at the dog walking to her bowl, and what happens right before that, right? Well, I stand up from the table with the plate. So why does the dog walk over to the bowl? Well, because I put the remaining eggs in her bowl, and that's her reinforcement. She continues to do this. The consequence of her walking to the bowl is she gets the eggs in her bowl. So why does me standing up from the table evoke this behavior? Well, it's not a motivating operation, right? Because it's a direct antecedent and it's permanently increasing the behavior. Okay, well, evoking the behavior, I should say, not increasing, evoking. And it's doing something very important to make it an SD. It's signaling that a consequence is available. When I stand up, that's a signal that if you walk to the bowl, you will get eggs. And that is what an SD does. That's what a discriminative stimulus does. It signals a consequence is available, which is why it evokes certain behavior. Each time I stand up, that is the SD, that is the signal that eggs are available if you walk over to the bowl, if you engage in a response. And that's how SDs are formed, right? Behavior is reinforced in the presence of certain stimuli. Those stimuli become signals for those consequences. It is not a prompt. Remember, a prompt comes in between an SD and a response. And it isn't a consequence because it's an antecedent, right? An antecedent can't be a consequence. A consequence can't be an antecedent. Just by definition, they're two very different things. Standing up signals that a consequence is available if you walk over to the bowl. The consequence is you get eggs in your bowl. So standing up from the table represents B, an SD. You're helping your supervisor with parent training. The parent says that they do not use punishment procedures, but instead they talk situations through with the child, which tends to decrease the behavior just as well as punishment. What is wrong with what the parent said? Now, you'll get this a lot in parent training, especially with newer parents who say, well, I don't want to use punishment. And then you say, well, okay, what do you do in a situation where behavior you don't like occurs? And they tell you, and you ask it how it goes, and they say, well, it decreases the behavior. So what do we know about reinforcement and punishment? We know reinforcement and punishment aren't based on the form or how it looks, okay? We know that reinforcement and punishment are classified and based on how it affects future behavior. If a consequence increases behavior, regardless of what it looks like, regardless of the form, that is reinforcement. If a consequence decreases behavior, regardless of what it looks like, regardless of the form, that is punishment. And that's the key distinction when people say, well, we don't use punishment. We've got to use something to decrease the behavior eventually, right? If you're decreasing the behavior, you are using punishment. Now, punishment has bad connotations just because of historically what punishment has represented. But in ABA, it is simply just a term we use to talk about a consequence which decreases future behavior. So when the parent says, I don't use punishment, but I talk through situations with the child, which decreases the behavior, talking through situations with the child is the punishment. So what is wrong with what the parent said? A, nothing is wrong with what the parent said. We just talked through what was incorrect. Okay. And we're not judging the parent because the parent's learning as well. That's why we're doing parent training. B, the parent was describing reinforcement. Well, no, if they said it tends to increase the behavior, sure, it's reinforcement, but they said it tends to decrease the behavior. C, the parent is implementing punishment unknowingly. Yes, they don't even realize that what they're doing is considered punishment in ABA language. That's why we do that, right? Because we don't want reinforcement and punishment to be viewed as something based on just what it looks like. It's how it affects future behavior. And then D, cannot determine from the information given. Well, sure we can, right? The parent is implementing punishment unknowingly, which is why parent training is occurring. And now we can walk through we can walk it through with them why punishment is considered punishment in ABA. If it decreases behavior, it's considered punishment. If you were asked to graph data for one of your ABA clients and you were told to use a line graph, where would you put the time component of the data? To visualize our line graph, right, we have a y-axis and an x-axis, and then our data path, okay? And don't get scared of graphing questions. I think graphing questions, once you practice a little bit, are very simple. So when we're using a line graph, what goes on the y-axis? Well, that's where our behavior goes, okay? So frequency of, duration of, whatever it might be, that's where our behavior goes. On the x-axis, that's where our time goes. Sessions or days or hours or years or minutes or months, whatever your time is, it's going to go on the x-axis. So if you were asked to graph data using a line graph, where would the time component go? Well, A, the x-axis. Let's read all of our answer choices because that's what we should do. The y-axis we just talked about is where our behavior goes. The baseline, there's no technical baseline. We take baseline data, right? And we'll have a data path for baseline data. And then the condition change line is a line just indicating either changing from baseline to intervention or intervention to another intervention. Don't overcomplicate it. Time goes on the x-axis. Behavior goes on the y-axis. What does it mean to reinforce a successive approximation when using shaping to change a behavior? Now, we've had a similar type question to this recently, but I've gotten feedback on, I don't understand what successive approximation means in regards to shaping. So successive approximation is just a technical, fancy, jargon-like way to say a response that is closer to the final response. We have an approximation, which means it isn't the final behavior, but it's approximately the final behavior. And successive just means coming after, okay? So each response that is closer to an approximation or what the final behavior looks like that comes after the previous approximation is reinforced. That's all we're saying. As behavior gets closer and starts to look more like the final behavior, we start to reinforce only the behavior that looks closer and closer and closer, okay? So A, you reinforce anything that looks similar. Well, you can't reinforce anything, okay? Because eventually we need to strengthen only behaviors that look like the final behavior. If you just reinforce everything, then there's no shaping going on. You're just reinforcing all kinds of different looks of how the behavior is appearing. B, you deliver reinforcement for responses as they get closer and closer to the final target behavior. Yes, as the responses get closer and closer to looking like the final target behavior, we're going to reinforce only the ones that are closer and closer and closer and closer. C, you only deliver reinforcement once the final target behavior is exhibited. Not true, of course, in shaping, we are delivering throughout the entire process of learning. And then D, you reinforce the first step in the behavior and then prompt through the rest of the responses. Now, what does that sound like? Forward chaining, right? Not shaping, it sounds like forward chaining. I'm going to reinforce the first step, prompt you through the rest, reinforce first and second, so on and so forth. D is forward chaining. Successive approximations just means you're going to deliver reinforcement for responses as they get closer and closer to the final target behavior. You're going to stop reinforcing certain behaviors that are further away and start reinforcing the ones that are closer and closer. So the answer here is B. Awesome. Thanks for watching. Check out btexamreview.com. Please subscribe if you can. As always, let us know when you pass so we can put you in the Sunday shout out. Work hard, study hard. See you soon.